Alright, I'm making this video because it's in my final minutes of being alive, and to anybody that finds this, I want you to tell my parents I love them deeply, and I'm very sorry for doing this. I know I'm gonna pay for my consequences. You know, I wish that I could have not done this, but I just lost my mind. I snapped, and I did what I did. Pay for it now, my consequences. I'm like all shaky and stuff, but like, I'm sorry for going this route. I know I said I'd turn myself in, but I'm not gonna do that. I can't do that. I can't pay those consequences, so I gotta do what I gotta do, which is gonna be over there, if you can see that. Yeah, I'm not gonna tell you what I'm gonna do, because I'm sure you guys know what I'm gonna do. My last words before I go: F you to the world, F everybody in it. I can't stand this place. F your God. And no, I'm not a nut rider, but fuck God. SKR, wicked intent for life. Peace.
Hello everyone, my name is Hailey Elizabeth, and today we are going to be talking about the crazy case of Richard Samuel McCrockey. This case has been on my radar for a while now, but ever since I got around to researching the specifics of this crime, it is so ruthless and brutal, and everyone in this case is so young too, which makes it so much scarier. But anyway, there is a lot to get through, so without further ado, we are going to get right into it. But before getting into all that, I do want to thank the sponsor of today's episode, Parade. Now, if you guys don't know what Parade is a sustainable underwear brand that basically provides pieces that really just encourages self-expression. Something that I really love about Parade is that they are extremely inclusive and they include all body types. And so when you're scrolling through, you're not just looking at like same exact model modeling the same exact clothes. You're able to actually see what the pieces look like on someone who has a body similar to yours, which I really love. And I personally just picked up a couple of pieces from Parade, and some of my absolute favorites has been the perfect rib long sleeve Henley in Lush Rib Hot Honey. I've been absolutely wearing this top non-stop. If you cannot tell, it's extremely wrinkly because I literally wear it every single day. Material that is so soft and so stretchy, which is something that's so important to me when it comes to clothes, because throughout the day I bloat so easily, and this material is the perfect thing to have on your body. It basically just stretches to your body throughout the day, which I absolutely love. And I also have been loving pairing these with the matching boy shorts, tucking into jeans, and these are the everyday Lush bottom boy shorts, again Lush Rib in the color Hot Honey. And recently Parade actually just re-released their replay collection, and I have been absolutely loving their bodysuits from that collection, specifically the long sleeve black one as well as the skinny strapped one. These bodysuits, once again, are literally just a material that is unworldly. Like, you put this on and you feel like you are putting nothing on. It is so silky, so smooth, again, just like hugs all the curves of your body in the right way. I absolutely love these, and overall I am just so obsessed with Parade, and I know you will be too. And if you actually click the link down below or go to yourparade.com/Hailey/BF and use my code HaileyE/BF at checkout, you will receive 50% off your order site-wide, which honestly I think is such a great deal, because that is another thing that I really love about Parade, is that they're so affordable. These are genuinely so soft, such good quality, and I've seen underwear on there for as low as like $6 a piece, which is such a good price. And so once again, if you guys want to try out Parade for yourself and figure out what all the hype is about, go to yourparade.com/Hailey-BF and use my code HaileyE-BF at checkout for 50% off your entire order site-wide, excluding all 80% off sales. And once again, thank you so much to Parade for sponsoring today's video. Now back to your video. Richard Samuel McCrockey was born in Castro Valley, Valley, California to his parents, his sister Emily, and his brother Eric. Growing up, Samuel was definitely described as an outcast and was bullied a lot in school, mostly for his weight and his red hair. But whenever he was bullied, he didn't really fight back too much because he was very scared and timid, and so he never stood up to any of his bullies. In high school, the bullying actually got so bad that he had to transfer to 2 different high schools before eventually, again, the bullying got so bad that he decided to drop out. Even though he was dropped out of high school, he didn't just— oh my gosh, I got something in my eyeball. I feel like every time I make these videos, there's always something in my eye. Oh my god. But when Richard dropped out of high school, he didn't really just sit around and do nothing. He got into graphic design and making websites and coding, and so that was something that he just did on the side for some extra money. And then also during this time is when he attempted at getting his music career off of the ground, specifically in horrorcore rap. Now, if you guys don't know what horrorcore is, because I had always heard of the phrase, but I didn't really know like in depth what it was. Horrorcore is a subgenre of hip hop that features horror themed lyrics and imagery, often inspired by slasher films or splatter films. And again, I didn't really know how popular horrorcore was, but apparently Masterclass, if you guys have ever heard of Masterclass, like Gordon Ramsay is on there and all these like wonderful directors and writers are on this website. Literally on Masterclass, they have an article talking about horrorcore, and on their website they say, quote, "Horrorcore is a subgenre of hardcore rap that delves into horror themes such as death, violence, slasher films, and Satan worship. It also goes by the names of horror rap or death rap. Horrorcore lyrics frequently reference horror films, violence, human sacrifice, cannibalism, mutilation, and Satan worship. Many horrorcore tracks are built on a foundation of synths and samplers that evoke fear and dread." So apparently, once again, this is like a really big genre, and I didn't even know about it until I was researching this case. And so a lot of people that were close would describe him as very kind and smart, but he was also very quiet and didn't really talk to anyone unless he was spoken to first. But as far as his online social media presence, it was the complete opposite to who he was in real life. Online, he was, as I said, a horrorcore rapper.
Oh baby, this is for you, my Emma, my ragdoll. I love you, baby, forever and always. Mwah. Hot sex, hot sex, hot sex, hot sex. Hey there, baby boo, I got 3 words for you. I love you, and it's coming straight from the heart. Ain't nothing in this world could rip us apart. Yeah, my Emma, my purr, my baby girl. She brings the best of my world when I look into her beautiful little.
So he would post a lot about his fantasies with horrorcore murder scenes and would even post videos of his room. He had horrorcore artwork on the walls and all of his favorite horrorcore bands. So online, Richard went by the names Psycho Sam and Little Demon Dog, and a lot of people think that his screen name is inspired by his unhealthy obsession with the killer named David Richard, aka the Son of Sam. Now, if you guys don't know who the Son of Sam is, the Son of Sam, aka David Richard Berkowitz, for those who don't know, was a mid-20s man from New York, and between the years of 1976 and 77, he had conducted 8 shootings that ended up killing 6 people. And when David was asked why he had committed all of those shootings when he was finally caught, he said that he was instructed to do it by a demon that manifested into a black dog that belonged to his neighbor named Sam. And the Son of Sam was also said to be an evangelical Christian, which from my understanding is just Christianity but with more emphasis on faith rather than actions. And it was also said that the Son of Sam was a part of a satanic cult that orchestrated the shootings as a ritual murder. And so David Richard Berkowitz, ironically his middle name being Richard, had clung on to Son of Sam and was obsessed with his beliefs. Richard would also post a lot on social media of him hanging out in graveyards and holding sharp knives and rusty axes in abandoned places. There was also one video where he was wearing a skull bandana and he was basically just freestyling in the rain in the front of like this Gothic church. And in the freestyle, he had said, quote, "The evil voices inside my head, they just want me to murder continuously. They want me to take lives on a mass murder spree. They love the smell of a body that's rotten and decayed. That's what I think about when I'm stalking my prey." Kind of crazy for a freestyle, but like it's 10 times scarier when you know, find out what he does in the future. So he would post a lot of his horrorcore songs and freestyles on his social media. So the bigger that he got, he started to connect with other people in the space that were interested in horrorcore like he was. He started to connect with more people that were interested in the niche, and ironically, his brother Eric also loved a little bit of horrorcore. He was more into like the punk rock / rock scene, but he did have a slight interest in horrorcore like Richard did. And one of the people that Richard would connect with throughout this horrorcore group was a girl who was 16-year-old Emma Kelly Niederbrock. So as far as Emma actually lived in Farmville, Virginia with her mom, who was Dr. Deborah Sue Kelly, who was a sociology and criminology professor. Did I say that right? Criminology, you know what I mean? She was a professor at Longwood University. And her dad was named Mark Allen Niederbrock, and he was a reverend. Ever since Emma was in middle school, she had been homeschooled and grew up in a very strict and religious household. And so then when she was in high school, she started to develop a very secret, rebellious phase. And I don't know, it kind of reminds me of like Lane from Gilmore Girls. So during this time is when she would start listening to horrorcore genre stuff and horrorcore rap. But she started to secretly hide this side of herself from her parents and would actually get signed posters from all of her favorite horrorcore rappers and hide them in between her mattresses. And then after a while, she started to rebel a little bit more and started to lean more into her horrorcore vibe by dyeing her hair a vibrant pink and doing her makeup a lot darker and a little bit more editorial. But when Emma's parents saw this change in Emma, they didn't really think much of it. They just kind of thought that maybe Emma was going through a phase. And they also thought that maybe this big change in Emma also had to do with the big transition going on in her life. She was going from public school to homeschool, and at the start of high school, she was homeschooled. So usually high school is like the biggest years of your life, and she had to be home for all of that. And then on top of that, her parents were also getting a divorce, and Mark, her father, currently wasn't living in the house. And so with all of this going on, they just thought like maybe this switch in Emma was because of all of that. But even though Mark had left the household, he didn't really let that affect his relationship with Emma at all. He would go to the house all the time to hang out with Emma, and every time the parents were near one another, they were very calm and civil. They made sure never to argue or bring anything negative in front of Emma. But at this point, Emma's mother, Deborah, started to become a little bit concerned for Emma after finding some really weird posters in Emma's room talking about dark satanic rituals and brainwashing. So that's when Deborah decided that the family should get family counseling so that they would be able to better communicate during this big transition. But like Richard, Emma also had some online friends in the space, specifically a girl who was 18-year-old Melanie Wells. The two of them had actually met through their favorite horrorcore rapper, which was a girl by the name of Razikel. And since the community was so small, it was really easy to make friends and interact with people that are the same as you. And Razikel was actually friends with both Melanie and Emma, but was closer a little bit more with Emma, mostly because both of their dads were reverends. So they had a lot to relate to, as in like they were both interested in this horrorcore genre, and they sort of had to keep it a secret from their parents, and also growing up in like a religious household. And ironically, the girls also found out through talking that they didn't even live that far away from each other, so they ended up hanging out with each other outside of like horrorcore concerts. And then shortly after, like down the road, that's when Melanie would enter into the group, and the three of them would become a trio. And the girls did become inseparable. Since they both had a love for horrorcore, they would go to a lot of small concerts and bands that were performing. They would go to live events. And it was also around this time where Emma started to talk to then 20-year-old Richard. The two of them would talk over social media, mostly just about their interest in horrorcore. And although Richard would always refer to Emma as his online girlfriend, Emma was really not on the same wavelength as him, and she really wasn't too serious about him. She never really called Richard her boyfriend, and every time Razikel would ask questions like, oh, so you and Richard, are you guys, you know, close? And she would respond with, quote, close and, you know, getting closer. So again, it sort of just seemed like Emma really wasn't as involved in this relationship as Richard was. I mean, they never really made anything official, but at the time, Richard was also going through a lot at home. His parents were getting a divorce, and his dad was asking his mom to leave the house. He was a little bit closer with his brother Eric than he was with his sister, but he didn't really have a good home life, nor did he have a good relationship with his family. Like, his family was the type of family that didn't really say I love you to each other, and if it was said, it was just really weird. And so with everything going on at home, and even when Richard tried to leave the house, like to go to school, he was heavily bullied to where he needed to leave school. So it seemed like his world was just so cruel to him, and the only outlet from his world was Emma. The two of them would talk online for an entire year until the two of them finally made plans to meet up in Southgate, Michigan, so that they could go see a horrorcore concert for a guy named Strictly for the Wicked. So to this concert, Emma actually invited her best friend Melanie to tag along because, you know, she's meeting Richard for the very first time. Sometimes it's a little bit nice to have a friend with you. So the three of them planned on going to Southgate, Michigan to go to this concert. But as I said, Emma lived in Farmville, Virginia, which is about a 10-hour drive away, and Richard lived all the way out in California. So Emma's parents didn't really want Emma going out to this concert because of everything going on, especially with the divorce, this change in her. And a couple days prior, Deborah had gone into Emma's room and saw some really concerning writing on the walls. One of the writings on the wall said, quote, kill the fetus, F your Jesus, I'd rather be dead cause your faith is meaningless. But Emma's parents still wanted to support Emma. They knew that, you know, they didn't really understand horrorcore, but they figured that maybe this was just a new thing that kids did, because it wasn't just Emma that was interested in it. It was also her best friend Melanie and all of the other friends that she had. So they wanted to be super supportive, and even though they didn't get it, they kind of wanted to help her express herself. So that's when Deborah said that she could go to the concert, but only if Richard had taken a plane from California to Virginia. Deborah would pick up Richard from the airport and take Emma, Melanie, and Richard back to Emma's house in Farmville, and all three of them would stay there for a couple days, and then on the day of the concert, Deborah would be the one to drive all three of the kids 10 hours to Michigan so that they would see the concert, and then after the concert, drive them 10 hours back to Farmville, Virginia. I mean, like, most parents literally just would have said no. Like, most parents would have gave up and literally said no. But you can see that her parents were so supportive of Emma and literally just wanted her to be happy. And they thought, you know, if she's not hurting anyone, then what's the harm in it? Maybe this is just an interest of hers. And so they were as supportive as possible. And especially with Deborah taking all of these steps, driving 20 hours just so her daughter could see a concert. Like, that's so much like dedication. So once this date was set in stone, the closer that the date became, the two, Emma and Richard, started to get really excited. And Emma would even post to Richard's wall saying things like, quote, "The next time you check your socials, you'll be at my house. I love you so, so much, baby. Forever and always. You are my one and everything. I cannot wait to see you, baby. It's like 6:17 a.m. I've been up since 4-ish, filled with uber amounts of excitement. I can't wait." And then later on that morning, the day that Richard was going to go to Emma's house, she would write on his wall saying, quote, "I leave to pick you up in 5 hours. Gah, my insides feel all squishy." And then on September 7th, that's when Richard would take a plane from California to Virginia, where he would get picked up from the airport by Deborah and Emma. But if any of you guys, oh my God, if any of you guys have ever met up with an online friend before, it is the biggest hit or miss in the world. Like, meeting up with an online friend, from my experience, has always been so awkward and weird, and I think it's because the vibe is so much more different online versus offline. You come offline and you have no clue what to talk about. You're like freaking out because it's a real person in front of you. And I'm not gonna say that for every single time, because I know that a lot of people have really good experiences with meeting online friends, but most of the time it is just so awkward. And so when Emma met Richard for the first time in person, she was very put off by his shy personality, and he didn't really speak or say much. She also said that she was surprised by his physical appearance because he didn't really look like how he looked in his pictures. So then on September 12th, this was Richard's 5th day at Emma's house, and that's when Emma, Richard, and Melanie had set off to go to the concert. The drive was definitely long, a 10-hour drive, but again, it just showed her parents' dedication to keep their daughter safe, but also wanted to support her in her interests. Emma's dad even went on the trip because Emma would post to her social media saying, quote, "Talk about a long ass drive sharing a car with a preacher. It's gonna suck, but no doubt it's worth it." But it was at the concert where things between Emma and Richard really started to fall off. At the concert, since Richard wasn't really a talkative person, the concert scene, especially the horrorcore concert scene, didn't really seem to be like his thing, and he quickly realized that after he got there. And it was said that at the concert, Emma and Richard were mostly just fighting the entire time. And it was said that Emma was kind of just talking to her other friends and Melanie and kind of left out Richard. And it was also said that she even talked to and made friends with other guys that went to the concert. And Richard this whole time was under the impression that they were dating because they had been flirting, but apparently Emma had only saw it as flirting and not a committed relationship. So at this concert from Richard, he says that Emma kind of made Richard feel like how he always used to feel when he was in high school, and he would be excluded from groups and he would not be taken seriously, and it made him feel very small. So by the time they got back to Emma's house after the concert, Richard was just left feeling very angry, confused, but just overall ready to go home. And then at 2:43 a.m. on September 14th, 2 days after the concert, that's when Melanie posted to her social saying that she was going back home on the 16th, which was 2 days after that, saying that she was actually really excited to go home because she missed her family. But when the 16th came around, when Melanie was supposed to be home, unfortunately, her family never got a text or a call of when Melanie was going to be home or where she was. They tried to call and text Melanie multiple times, but was met with no answer until her dad decided to drive all the way out to Farmville to go to Emma's house and knock on the door to see if everything was okay. Her mom and dad both went, and when they knocked on the door, they were actually met with Richard, who said that Melanie, Emma, and Emma's mom, Deborah, had left to go to the mall for a couple hours. But Melanie's parents got a really bad feeling about this. They felt like something was really wrong, and so then they decided to stake out in front of the house for 8 hours while while calling Emma and Melanie and was reached no answer. And for that entire 8 hours that they were sitting outside of the house, no one was seen walking in or out the house. Her parents eventually left, but ended up contacting Razikel, who was Emma and Melanie's best friend, to basically ask her if she had heard from or seen Melanie. And Razikel said that the last time she saw Melanie and Emma was at the concert. They were also able to get Richard's phone number, and when they called Richard did pick up twice, but every time he picked up, he kind of sounded very weird. He wasn't really speaking clearly, and he also made up an excuse both times when they called as to where the girls were at. Would even call Mark, Emma's father, who as I said, wasn't living at the house at that time. She actually called him and asked if he would be able to check on the girls because he has a key to the house. So then he said sure, he would stop by later on that day to just check up on everyone. But unfortunately, after that, Mark was never heard from again. Melanie's parents then decided to call a welfare check on Emma's household, to which when the police got there, they basically did nothing. They looked at the house, and when they knocked on the door, that's when Richard came up to the door. And the police basically asked if Emma, Deborah, and Melanie were home, and Richard had said the excuse that the girls went out to go see a movie and weren't going to be home for a couple hours. So the police decided to declare this as a successful welfare check, didn't even go into the house, and basically was like, okay, and then walked away. Even at times when Richard was clearly lying, because over-explaining is a really big sign of lying, and Richard was over-explaining like crazy. He went to go on to tell a story to the officers the day before the girls were on the highway and their car had died out and they needed to get like a tow truck. And then on top of that, their phones were dead. Like, it was just this whole elaborate story that the police did not ask for, but like Richard said it and the police were still like, okay, makes sense. But hours and hours on that day would pass and Melanie's mom still received no answer from Melanie, and she felt like something was really off. Later that night, she called the police again, demanding another welfare check, asking to go inside of the house to make sure everything was okay. But once again, when they went to the house, they were met with Richard at the door, who basically said that the girls were out at the mall, and then again, the police just left. Melanie's mom would even call the household of Emma and even spoke to Richard, to which when Melanie's mom had asked if she could speak to anyone, Richard just said, quote, "They can't come to the phone right now." The next day on the 27th, that's when Richard would actually contact his own family to tell them that he was going to be staying out there for an extra few days and to just ask how his family was. And so as Richard was on the phone with his sister, he was about to hang up, and before hanging up, that's when he would say, quote, "I love you guys." And now, as I said, Richard grew up in a family where "I love you" was never said. And so when his sister heard him say that, she kind of got the feeling that something was really wrong. And so then after this call, ironically, Richard would call the police on his own self. He said he wanted some officers at the house because there was some weird noises coming from his basement and he wasn't sure if it was his dog or not. And literally, like, the whole phone call from this is so odd.
Hey, could I have a police unit come by my house? Because I keep hearing sounds in the basement, and I'm scared to go down there and check what it is.
Okay, what kind of sounds do you hear?
Like just noises, like something moving around down there. I think it's the dog, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
We have 2 dogs, but one of them is upstairs. I just put him up there, and the other one, it might be down there, but I'm not sure if it's the dog or not.
Okay, and it's in the basement. What's your name?
Sam.
Sam?
But this isn't my house. I'm staying at my girlfriend's house.
Okay. All right, we'll get somebody to come up there, okay?
Thank you very much. Bye.
And so the police do come over and they do go inside of the house and they go down to the basement, and they said that they looked around and they didn't really find anything, so then they just left. But it wasn't until the day after those police officers were inside the house that neighbors of the house would call the police to tell them that there is a putrid smell coming from the household next door, which was Emma's house. And a lot of people would even compare it to the smell of putting expired food in the garbage outside. Now, as you can tell, the police's behavior during this entire thing is so incredibly frustrating. The police were literally in the house the day before, and if the day after neighbors are calling in because of how foul the smell is, the police definitely smelt it the day before if their report was correct and they actually did go inside the house. And also on the police's end for not filing missing persons cases on any of these 2 minors and a doctor that never showed up to her shift at work. And so the very next day, that's when Melanie's mom would call into the police again to say that she hadn't seen her daughter in 2 days, and that same exact day, that's when her father sat outside the house for another 8 hours and once again didn't see anyone enter or exit the home. But then later on that night, when Melanie's father came home, that's when Melanie's mother decided to call the police one more time, and that was on September 18th, and it had been 2 days since the girls had been missing. When police showed up, even before walking into the home, they were met with an intense smell coming from inside. Officers walked into the home and followed the smell that led upstairs and was met with what they put in the police report, a slaughterhouse. In the house, they would find the bodies of Melanie, Emma, Emma's mother, Deborah, and Emma's father, Mark. They would find Emma and Melanie's bodies in Emma's room, both bludgeoned to death. They would also find the body of Deborah in her bed and Mark in a downstairs bedroom. There were several weapons found at the crime scene, such as a 6-inch knife, a rusty axe, a hammer, and a long hatchet that's usually used to cut wood. When taken into autopsy, all of these bodies were found with no defensive wounds, and they were all bludgeoned to death by a heavy object. And so it's suspected that Richard probably killed the women as they were sleeping and then attacked Mark as soon as he walked in the door to check on the girls. But as the police were unraveling this really gruesome crime scene, they actually saw no sight of Richard. But Richard kind of shot himself in the foot because he had stolen Mark's car that day that was parked at the family home in order to drive away, but since he also didn't have a driver's license, he crashed the car immediately and then got arrested for not having a driver's license. But when the police showed up, Richard actually gave the story to them that he was driving his dad's car and that he didn't want his dad to find out because he would get in tons of trouble, and that it's just better if he tells his dad what happened because then it wouldn't be as harsh. And to this, the police completely believed him, and so they immediately let Richard go, and on his way, a little bit of princess treatment, they even offered him a ride in the tow truck to get dropped off at home. But Richard didn't actually want to go home because at this point there was a bunch of police at the house, and so instead he just asked to be dropped off at a nearby convenience store at 6 a.m. And the driver would actually go on to say in court that when he was driving Richard around, there was a putrid smell coming from his clothes, and the smell was so strong that he visibly, like the tow truck driver, visibly heaved twice because of how bad the smell was. He had to roll down the windows and stick his head out the window because the smell was just so strong. And the tow truck driver would even say at court, quote, "He stunk like the devil." And the tow truck driver also said that at one point he had noticed that Richard had some red marks on his neck, and so when asked what those were, Richard just said that they were hickeys from his girlfriend, and then goes on to over-explain and go on to say that the car that he was driving wasn't even his car, it was his girlfriend's dad's car. And then when he was dropped off at the nearby convenience store, that's when he would call a cab to take him to the Richmond International Airport. But ironically, as he was on the way to the airport, his cab driver actually got pulled over for for speeding, to which when this cab driver got pulled over, Richard said that he was gonna go outside the car and have a cigarette while the cab driver and the police officer got things sorted out. And he did. He literally got out the car, had a cigarette, and the police never noticed him. But although that specific police officer didn't know who Richard was, there was still currently multiple officers back at the crime scene. The police also received a phone call from Razikel's boyfriend by the name of Andreas. And so Andreas would call the police and said that one of Richard's friends had actually contacted him saying that the other day him and Richard had a really weird conversation over the phone where Richard was making jokes about how he might have killed a person or killed a couple people. And by the way that Richard was saying it, the friend didn't really think that he was joking and he got really scared, so he talked to Andreas about this. Now, I'm pretty sure that Richard did have mutuals with Razikel and her boyfriend because the horrorcore group that they had created was quite small, like one big group chat. So once they got this call from Andre, that's when they knew that Richard was most likely the murderer of 4 people. And if he was trying to flee, he would either be at a bus station, a train station, or an airport. And that is exactly where they found him. When officers showed up to the Richmond International Airport, they would find Richard sleeping in the baggage claim area and arrested him immediately. And mistakenly, Richard had also left a piece of paper in the car that he had crashed that said, quote, Richmond Airport, 1 Richard E. Byrd, Terminal 200. Literally the exact address of where he was going to be and the exact terminal of where he was going to be. Now, unfortunately, when Robert was taken into questioning, he immediately asked for a lawyer, but the police were actually able to claim his clothing. And on his clothing, the police would describe it as, quote, caked in gore, assuming that he never changed his clothes or showered after committing the crime. Richard started to, over time, open up more about the crime, saying small things like he only used the wooden chopping axe because he thought that no one would suffer. Although there was DNA found on the hammer, axe, and knife, meaning that he used all these weapons on these victims. And then he also said that before committing the crime, he had drank a bunch of alcohol, smoked a bunch of weed, and took some painkillers. The police would also go on to say that when they entered the home, they realized that Mark was most likely murdered in the living room because they also concluded that by the front door, there was a huge dent in the floor, as if when Richard had hit Mark in the head, as soon as he walked in the door, he kept on beating him so violently that it created a dent in the floor. Hey guys, and also, I actually just connected the dots when I was rewatching this back. Remember how I said earlier that I wasn't really sure if the police actually went inside of the house to go down to the basement, as the report said? This right here kind of proves that the police never went inside, because if they were to go inside, they would not only smell the dead body smell, but they would also see the huge dent on the floor right by the door, as well as all of the blood that was still in the living room when the police had went inside and discovered the body. So if the police did go inside and did go to the basement, they would have seen everything. They would have seen the blood. They would have seen the big dent in the floor. So I just wanted to put that in real quick because that kind of further proves my theory that I don't think they ever went inside the house, which is so frustrating. Anyway, and it gets more frustrating. But as I said, when police showed up to the crime scene, they didn't find Mark in the living room. They actually found him in the downstairs bedroom. So the police asked him why did he move Mark's body to the downstairs bedroom, and he would say that he did that shortly after the police had their first welfare check. At first, Richard would plead not guilty, but if he pled not guilty, he would get the chance at getting the death penalty. So that's when a year later, he would plead guilty to 2 counts of capital murder, 2 counts of first-degree murder. His defense team tried to argue that Richard had experienced remorse and said that he felt bad for the whole thing. And his defense team also tried to say that Richard felt so bad that he actually had thoughts of offing himself during this time. And they also tried to argue that during the time of when he was in the house for 2 days with these bodies, he was expressing a lot of remorse, and he even had thoughts of offing himself, but of course not enough remorse to turn himself into the police. But there were just too many witness statements from Melanie's mother, the tow truck driver, and even the cab driver, to which Richard had told the cab driver that he was actually having some girl troubles. He said that him and his girlfriend went to a concert recently, but he saw her talking to a bunch of guys and thought it was weird, and then at the end of the night, he ended up seeing a text message on her phone from one of the guys at the concert saying that he was in love with her. And so then when he saw that, he just got really angry and he didn't talk to her the entire night when they got back. But he had said that he didn't want to start an argument or anything, so instead he just decided to wait around until she fell asleep, and then he walked to the convenience store to go out and get some fresh air, which honestly I think is so crazy, because even Richard in that moment knew what the right thing to do was. He knew what the better choice was, and he was aware of what he was doing at the time of the crime, yet he just chose to kill them instead of doing what he knew he was supposed to do, which was just walk away. But the cab driver went on to say that Richard was actually super polite and nice, and he said that he actually talked about Emma very passionately, as if he was very much in love with her. But what the cab driver didn't know was that at this point, Emma had already been dead for 2 days. But in the end, Richard pled guilty and was given 4 life sentences, so basically life in prison. He also waived away his right to appeal per his plea deal. So since the case never went to trial, as Richard was like walking into the courthouse, there was a bunch of reporters outside, and one of the reporters had asked, "Why did you do it?" And Richard just responded with, quote, "Jesus told me to do it." But I think Richard throughout all of this had so many other options. He could have just called his family to go home. He could have just been open to Deborah and told her what was going on, how he was feeling, and how he wanted to go back home. I feel like any other person in that situation would probably just, tough it out and just, count down the days of when you're going back home so that you could never deal with this again. But he didn't do that. He instead chose violence. And then on top of that, he decided to sit there for 3 days in this house with the dead bodies that he just killed. And then when Mark tried to come into the house, he took another innocent victim and bludgeoned him so violently that it left a dent in the floor. And I think since Richard did grow up in an abusive household, he was never really taught to be honest with his emotions. And so instead of expressing his emotions, he instead just kept that all bottled up. And then instead of dealing with it, he instead manifested that into anger and hatred towards the world and the people around him and himself. And that's probably why whenever he was bullied in high school, it made him feel so small, because he wasn't able to stick up for himself, and he was frustrated at that. He was frustrated with the feeling of feeling weak and small, and so that's why he developed this horrorcore persona, a person who is dark and mysterious and not to be messed with, very tough and psychological sort of guy. And this persona gave him a little bit of leverage. It made him feel like he was important. It made him feel like he shouldn't be messed with, and this gave him confidence. And so the night when they went out to this concert, it kind of felt like he was that weak and small person that he used to be. And so as a way to gain back that control, to make him feel not to be messed with, he decided to take the lives of 4 people. Now, a lot of people also blame the horrorcore genre as the aid in influence to Richard to think that murder and gore was okay, therefore his actions were also okay. But a lot of people in the horrorcore community say that the style of music is just a dark fantasy style of music, and most of the time people that listen to horrorcore are usually like the nicest nicest people you'll ever meet. And a lot of people in the community say that it really takes someone with deep set mental issues to do something this brutal. And so if you're listening to it and you have underlying mental issues, then that music will just enhance those mental issues. But as I said, Richard, since the beginning, knew what the right thing to do was. He literally said it himself that he should have just left the house, you know, came back, and then just counted down the days until he was finally able to go home. Once again, he chose none of that. He decided to go the most violent and brutal way there was. But yeah, that is the end of today's video. I hope you guys found today's case interesting, and if you did, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and let me know all of your comments and opinions about the case down below. Do you think Richard deserved the sentence that he got, or do you think because of his age being so young that he should have got a lower sentence? I also want to hear your guys' comments and opinions about the police's behavior in this situation, because it is so infuriating. They showed up to the house 3 times, all 3 times having dead bodies in it, and all 3 times they just walked out of the house. And I also conspiracized that they never actually went down in the basement. I think that's just what it said on the police report, just so they could write it off. So again, I also want to hear your guys' opinions about that in the comments below. Yeah, that is all from me. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day today. And as always, I love you, I love you, I love you, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.